Howdy folks, and welcome to another episode of Mingles with Jingles. I hope you all had a great Christmas. I hope you're all going to have a fantastic and prosperous new year, because 2023 was an absolute disaster. It was not my favourite year. There were some great games came out in 2023, but on a personal level, we lost one of our pets. I lost my best friend Eddie. Starting in November, YouTube decided it was going to turn on mid-roll adverts on my videos, whether I wanted them to or not, which, was nice. By default, I've always had mid-roll adverts turned off on my videos because having your video interrupted with an advert sucks. But, well, YouTube are determined to drive away as many of my subscribers as they possibly can in pursuit of short-term profit. So there's that. How many of you have started seeing mid-roll adverts on my videos, by the way? Because I'm not turning them on. This is YouTube deciding to do it for itself. During my 2-week Christmas break, in which I uploaded 3 hours worth of Cyberpunk videos, I thought, I'll look around for some new games to start doing. I mean, I know I've still got System Shock, the remake of that to do as well, but it's nice to have more than one iron in the fire, so I got myself Alan Wake 2. Probably not going to be seeing too many Alan Wake 2 videos on this channel in the coming weeks, for a couple of reasons. First, YouTube would absolutely shit themselves due to the nature of the game content. Like in the first 10 minutes there's a human sacrifice and lots of fat, bold male nudity, but also it's technically almost unplayable. And I'm not talking about the system requirements, which are pretty steep. I mean, this was a game that was always kind of going to be pushing the boundaries of what's graphically achievable on a modern PC. But there are all kinds of performance issues unrelated to the hardware requirements. This is a cutscene right at the beginning of the game. Watch as she gets out of the car and see the frame skipping. There it is. Do you see that? Don't worry, it's going to get a lot worse. Also, bear in mind, I'm running a Ryzen 7 5800X with 8 physical cores, 32 gigabytes of RAM and an RTX 4080 graphics card, well above the recommended minimum system specifications. And wait until you see the stuttering and frame skipping that goes on in this game. There we go. That's what happens when you try to pan the camera around. I mean, it's a Remedy game. Remedy always kind of try to push the limits of what the PC is capable of doing. I don't know if you remember Control when it first came out, back in the days when the RTX 20 series were the new kids on the block. And Control really pushed the limits of what that first generation of ray tracing tech could do, which wasn't a lot because the 20 series RTX cards weren't very good at all. And it's kind of the same here in Alan Wake 2, except these aren't first generation ray tracing cards anymore. I mean, this is an RTX 4080, it's third generation, and it's it's not just third generation, it's very good third generation. And
I think I hear someone.
Wow.
Could be our deputy.
There we go. Look at that. That is just, it's unacceptable. So naturally, brand new game. I'd like for it to be at least moderately playable, especially when I'm not even doing anything impressive other than trying to turn around. So I googled it. It turns out that what's going on, or at least everybody's best guess for what's going on, and this is why I say it's not really related to the steep hardware requirements. It's because what's happening is that these stutters and frame skips are caused by the game loading in assets direct from your disk, instead of pre-caching everything in my 32 gigabytes of RAM. This is entirely to do with the way the game is coded. Because even if you're streaming in these assets from an SSD, which is way faster than a hard disk, it's still not instantaneous. It would be instantaneous and there'd be no stuttering or frame skipping if all of the game's assets, the textures and so on, were being loaded into RAM, pre-cached, and accessed from there. That would be instantaneous, but that is apparently not happening. Or it's not happening enough. The game isn't using enough of your system RAM. And with full path tracing turned on, it is an extraordinarily beautiful game. But it doesn't matter how pretty it all is if you're getting frame skipping and stuttering when you're standing still. And changing your settings doesn't work. It's not a frame generation issue. It's not a path tracing issue. You can disable DLSS 3, you can disable frame generation, disable path tracing, crank everything down to medium, and you still get stutters when standing still or trying to do anything as moderately complicated as just turning the camera view around. Yeah,
Make sure I'm seeing the clues.
it's just not good enough, which was a major shame. Not just because of the money that I spent on it, although I did get it cheap in the Epic Game Store Christmas sale, but also it seems like a really good game. Unfortunately, it's borderline unplayable due to all this frame skipping and stuttering, and it's 100% unwatchable due to all of that frame skipping and stuttering. Another game that I tried over Christmas was the new Ubisoft pirate game, Skull and Bones. And tried is probably the right word, because I only got a couple of hours into this due to the very short window that it was actually available. I think when I actually got into the closed beta, there was only 6 hours left. So I didn't get to play for long. So this is by no means a review. It's barely even a preview. But it seemed alright. I do have some reservations, and we'll talk about those in a bit, but the thing that you need to know about Skull and Bones is this game has basically been in development hell for the best part of 10 years. It was originally supposed to be an expansion for Assassin's Creed Black Flag, because people really, really loved the, what was at the time, innovative ship combat. And then it never happened, for one reason or another. Obviously, I'm not privy to the goings-on of Ubisoft Singapore, where primary development for this game took place, but it's kind of easy to imagine that they thought, well, yeah, I mean, the ship combat in Black Flag is really good, we can just do a game about that. And so they beavered away, making that happen. And then Sea of Thieves came out, which kind of took the wind out of their sails a bit. And Sea of Thieves didn't do particularly well because it was just ship combat. So they've had all kinds of major rethinks. And when you watch the credits for this thing, it's not just Ubisoft Singapore. There are Ubisoft offices from places around the world that I didn't even know had Ubisoft offices that have had a hand in making this. There's a lot of different cooks been stirring the pot here, and that's rarely a good sign. This could very easily have been a game that was being pulled in too many different directions by too many different people trying to impose their own ideas from all of these different Ubisoft offices around the world as to exactly what this game should be. And I think that is part of the reason why it's been in development for 10 years, because they just didn't really know what they wanted the game to be. I mean, initially it was just going to be Assassin's Creed Black Flag, just the sailing bits, but then Sea of Thieves happened, which was basically just the sailing bits, and didn't do very well. And so I'm fairly sure that that was basically what this game was going to be, and then they thought, right, we need to do more, but nobody could agree what it was that they needed to do, so in development for 10 years. I can actually remember a couple of years back, it was long before COVID, so we're probably talking 4 or 5 years ago, I was approached by Ubisoft to get involved in the development in some way. I cannot remember, because it was a long time ago. I cannot remember the specific details, but there was some kind of interest within Ubisoft of starting to get creators involved, which suggests that they were about ready to release the game, and they wanted to start generating hype. And, well, clearly they never did release the game, because this was 4 or 5 years ago. Which suggests that the game has changed radically between what they were preparing to share with creators way back then and what it actually is now. So, yeah, it's had a bit of a troubled development history, but it's now ready. They were happy to show it off to the public in this closed beta, which was quite enjoyable, I have to admit, but I did have certain reservations. And again, you have to remember, I only had a couple of hours. So I by no means experienced everything that the game had to offer. I literally barely just managed to scratch the surface. But what I saw was just Assassin's Creed Black Flag. Just the ship bits. Now, it's possible that that's quite intentional on Ubisoft's behalf, at least at the beginning of the game, because that's the recognizable thing. That's what they want to use to draw people in, so that's what they show you at the beginning. It's entirely possible, hopefully even likely, that there's a lot more to it further on into the game. That raises the next question, though. What exactly is there? because relatively early on, and I did get to, I mean, you're watching it appear on screen right now, there's a sort of central pirate hub where you get to build, upgrade your ships, your weapons, your cargo capacity, your crew, and so on and so on. And while there is a single player story that you're going to follow, although calling it a story, at least this far, might be a bit of a stretch, you basically have to build up your renown amongst the pirates. At the beginning of the game, everybody's just telling you how shit you are. Nobody knows you. Nobody respects you. So you need to go out there and raid shipping and plunder trade routes and so on in order to raise your renown, which unlocks various different things and so on and so on and so on. You know, there's nothing revolutionary about this. Any number of different games all do the same sort of thing. It's just that Skull and Bones' hook is that you're pirates. And pirates are cool. But you'd expect with 10 years of development and with what happened to Sea of Thieves, the game would be slightly more than just the ship bits from Assassin's Creed Black Flag, which is what the game was originally supposed to be 10 years ago. So what happened in that 10-year development period? Well, and again, I don't know because I only had a couple of hours to play. I suspect what we're probably seeing, because this is Ubisoft after all, and they're not exactly known for innovation. I mean, they used to be. We are talking about a game based around Assassin's Creed Black Flag after all, which was a major innovation at the time, but in the time between then and now, Ubisoft have crammed that ship combat into every single game they've produced that could possibly support it. Assassin's Creed Odyssey, Assassin's Creed Valhalla. They've been doing quite a bit of it in the Assassin's Creed series. And that's not all they've been doing with the Assassin's Creed series as well. They've basically turned Assassin's Creed into Far Cry, haven't they? And again, you know, if that's what they've done with Black Flag, that wouldn't necessarily be a bad thing if you like the Far Cry open world gameplay experience. Now, I am speculating here, of course, based on the couple of hours of gameplay that I've experienced. And I mean, if this was Assassin's Creed Black Flag with the ship bits, with a Far Cry open world experience tacked onto the top of it, would that really be a terrible thing? It wouldn't be particularly imaginative, but this is Ubisoft. They haven't really done imaginative for the best part of the last 10 years. But what they do, with notable exceptions, yes, Far Cry 6, we are looking at you. Okay, Far Cry New Dawn, we're looking at you as well. But what they do pretty well. Well, one other reservation would be the fact that there is player versus player in this game, whether you like it or not. At least that appears to be the case. Again, limited experience, only had a couple of hours to play. That's going to be the number one comment, isn't it? Have a drink every time Jingle says limited experience. I've only had a couple of hours to play. But, you know, you do need to bear this in mind. But you will come across, and I did come across, other players playing the same game as me, in the same world as me. And you are able to attack other players and take their stuff. And other players are able to attack you and take their stuff. Isn't that just Sea of Thieves? So you can see why I have certain reservations about Skull and Bones. It certainly has the potential to be excellent. In fact, the bits that I have played are excellent. It's just a question of the longevity, because it can't just be a Sea of Thieves clone. It can't just be the shit bits from Assassin's Creed Black Flag. You know, with 10 years of development, there needs to be more to it than that. Otherwise, what's the point? You may as well just be playing Sea of Thieves. And that was kind of worrying. And, you know, obviously not being able to answer that question for myself because I wasn't able to play it for long enough, I ended up having to turn to Google. And the overwhelming number of responses to the query, is there any actual difference between Skull and Bones and Sea of Thieves, all said that yes, the two games are very, very similar, but they're different in tone. I guess because Sea of Thieves is very cartoonish and Skull and Bones isn't. And other than that, yeah, you're basically playing the same game. 10 years of development. Oh, Ubisoft. The one thing that you didn't want the game to be, after Sea of Thieves came out and quite literally took the wind out of your sails, a game which, by the way, was basically ripping off what you did in Assassin's Creed Black Flag, And then after 10 years of development, that's exactly what Skull and Bones is. That doesn't mean it's going to be bad. I mean, I kind of enjoyed it. And you can see how good it looks. But is it going to be enough? Is sailing out and doing the same thing over and over and over, just with a slightly better ship every time you do it, is that going to be enough to sustain people's interests? I mean, at the end of the day, that's just more or less exactly what World of Tanks and World of Warships are. And they're both doing quite well, so maybe it will be enough. And to be completely fair to Ubisoft, it's not just sailing out in a slightly more upgraded ship every time doing the same things over and over and over. They have put what are essentially raid bosses in. There's a Kraken that you'll need to team up with other players to take down. There's things like that. So it isn't just sailing around fighting other ships and looting them. You know, there are boss encounters, although, come to think of it, Sea of Thieves had that as well. Okay. Yeah, it's basically Sea of Thieves, just with a different tone. It's less cartoony and more realistic looking. And that might be enough. I mean, the game's coming out on the 13th of February. I don't know if I'll be playing much of it, but I suspect it's probably going to sell well enough to be considered a success. Although it's probably not going to be snagging any Game of the Year awards. It's just kind of disappointing that they've had 10 years to figure out what this game is going to be. And in those 10 years, the best they could come up with was to have a clone of a game that ripped off one of their games in the first place. Just with slightly more realistic rather than cartoony graphics. But that's Ubisoft for you. Anyway, Skull and Bones, coming out on the 13th of February. I mean, it'll probably be okay. I'm not expecting better than that, though. Skull and Bones isn't the only nautical combat game I've been dabbling with over my 2-week Christmas break. There's another one that doesn't come from a huge studio. Well, it kind of does and it kind of doesn't, but it definitely doesn't have the resources spent on it that Skull and Bones or Alan Wake 2 have. There's a new title coming out from Microprose. It's called Boat Crew. In it, you play the captain of a PT boat in the Pacific during World War II. I'm kind of impressed with Microprose lately, I have to say. Although this isn't the Microprose that some of you may remember. For gamers of a certain age, you will have fond memories of the original Microprose, founded by, amongst others, Sid Meier, a company that in the 90s developed some legendary simulation titles like Civilization, Carrier Command, F-15 Strike Eagle, and numerous others. And I'm kind of impressed with what this Microprose are doing, because it's not the same Microprose. The original company went bust sometime around 2003. It didn't technically go bust. It got bought up by a whole bunch of different publishers, and they started kind of phasing out the Microprose brand and putting their own name on things. Infogrames, I believe, was the French publisher who bought them out from Hasbro and basically ran Microprose into the ground. At that point, almost all of the original developers had left. Sid Meier had long gone and established Firaxis Studios, for example, another studio you've probably heard of. Well, recently, a guy called David Ligeti, a former Bohemia Interactive developer who'd been a big fan of the Microprose titles when he was growing up, since I think 2005 has been steadily buying up the various different Microprose intellectual properties, and then in 2019 I think he basically relaunched the company using the Microprose brand. And it would have been very easy, because we've seen it happen before, where a developer buys up a brand name and just hopes to trade on the brand recognition and churn out any old shit. Infogrames, for example, who used to actually own Microprose before they ran it into the ground, they did that with Atari. Didn't work out very well for them. It would have been very easy for them to do that with Microprose. The problem is it would have been a huge mistake because, well, the brand name Microprose is only going to have any kind of nostalgic relevance to, well, people of my age and slightly younger. People who actually remember the glory days of the company. People who remembered the original Civilization. F-15 Strike Eagle, B-17 Flying Fortress, Formula One Grand Prix, Railroad Tycoon, you know, legendary 90s titles that all came out under this brand. So just buying the brand name and hoping to trade on brand recognition and churn out any old shit would have been a massive mistake for the company. Because the only people who are going to recognise the brand are people like me who remember the original titles and are going to expect more of the same. Otherwise, what's the point in buying up the intellectual property associated with this company? And so I'm very happy to report that they have been doing exactly that. Not churning out any old shit, they have been releasing titles reminiscent of the original titles that Microprose were famous for. They reissued B-17 Flying Fortress, they redid Carrier Command. They've just apparently managed to regain the intellectual property rights to the Falcon series. Yes, that Falcon series. That's pretty exciting. They're probably going to spend a lot of money on that. They haven't spent a huge amount of money on Boat Crew. I mean, you can quite clearly see this is a small game, but it's good because it's exactly the kind of game that Microprose were famous for. And it's exactly the kind of game that you want from Microprose, if you've ever heard of Microprose. So I'm very, very pleased with what this company have been doing. I don't want to talk too much here about this Boat Crew game, because I will be doing a video on it. But, I mean, even though this isn't even early access, this is like a closed developer version. But it's very stable. They've got the working tutorial, which you can see running in the background here, and there's a campaign where you get to manage the boat, upgrade the boat, look after the crew, and fight the war in the Pacific. I mean, it's everything that you'd expect and want of a Microprose title. So good job to the new Microprose for maintaining the tradition of the old Microprose instead of just trying to make a quick buck by cashing in on brand recognition, which would have been a horrible mistake, but they were smart enough to know what they had and what to do with it. So, video on this title, Boat Crew, coming up very, very soon, and that just about wraps it up for this week's episode of Mingles with Jingles. The first Mingles with Jingles of 2024. Here's hoping that you all had a great Christmas and 2024 isn't going to suck nearly as much as 2023 did, although certainly in my case 2023 did not set an incredibly high bar. So yeah. Anyway, that's it for today. Glad to be back. Hope you all had a great Christmas. Take care, and I'll catch you next time.